Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Maybe I'll speak a little bit louder to make sure that those tutoring at the back can hear me. Hello, my name's James Manning. Some of you may have seen me yesterday. Some of you already know who I am. But this isn't about me. I'm here to chair the two game art and aesthetics sessions. I'm delighted to be able to bring to you some stellar presenters that are going to keep the S-tier sort of presentation style going, and very much excited to see how they have managed to bring their S-tier PowerPoint skills to the table. I've had a quick sneaky look. It's going to be exciting. So this is the first of two sessions. They are back-to-back, but in one sense, because we only have 5 speakers signed up, we will be able to take a 5-minute comfort break in between the two sessions, so just be aware of that. But in the first session, we have got Meghann O'Neill from Macquarie University. We've got Nikolas, I didn't put my glasses on, Matovinovic. I do apologize for stumbling through that. Around here, I should have just done that, but I've used my hands up. And then Fourie from MIT University. So thank you, Meghann.
Hello, I am Meghann, but I would actually like to introduce you to Phil. He's joining us online. Can you just say hi, Phil?
Hello.
Oh, hello, Phil. And basically all week we've been hearing from teachers about their research, and it's been so great. I've really enjoyed it. But I brought along my very own student, and that's Phil. And in 2024, Phil was a second-year Bachelor of Music student enrolled in the Digital Music and Media program at Sydney Conservatorium. He took my Composing for Games class, which is mandatory for his degree. And after only a few weeks, all students are assessed on creating a small original Twine game to showcase their original music, structured as a transformative textural STEM system. The fastest way for you to understand what that is, especially if you're not a musician, is obviously to experience it. So we're going to do that, and we're going to play the Mr. Ice Cream game by Phil and Kuao. Sorry, I practiced that so hard. Kuao has kindly volunteered to play it for us. So here we go.
You're going to switch it into them?
Yes, sorry, I was going to do that.
Sorry. Welcome to the Mr. Ice Cream game. Play. What a lovely, warm summer day. I wonder what's in the freezer. Open the freezer. Open the freezer. It's Mr. Ice Cream. Nice and chill in here, isn't it? Wouldn't you like to get outside and enjoy this wonderfully warm, sunny day, Mr. Ice Cream? Yeah, let's have some fun in the sun. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. This is the best. Isn't this the coolest, Mr. Ice Cream? Yeah, let's play all day. Nah, let's go back to the freezer. Boring. Let's play all day. Oh no. Mr. Ice Cream, you're melting. Quick, back to the freezer. Oh well. Quick, back to the freezer. Oh well. Oh well. Oh well. Mr. Ice Cream is dead. What have you done? What do you have to say for yourself? It wasn't me, it was DiGRA. Seriously? It wasn't me, it was DiGRA? That's all you have to say? Please show a bit more respect. I'm sorry, Mr. Ice Cream. Play again. That's awesome.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. So I asked Phil to record a little video to tell you what he learned by making the Mr. Ice Cream game. And here it is.
So I learned that being a musician, or just music in general, can be a great inspiration for making a game. People often describe my weird music as sounding like it's melting, and I wanted to make a game that was about melting. And a melting ice cream was all that was needed. Sometimes the simplest ideas are the best, and I think that's really true for Mr. Ice Cream. It was so much fun to make, and it's always a ton of fun to play and play again and share with everybody.
So those were some really well articulated thoughts from Phil, and they're a great segue into my research, which was about making games to learn music. And I'm going to use a story to help segue. Sometime in the early 1990s, my dad plonked the hefty Q Basic manual onto my desk, and I made a game that guessed your favourite colour. But if you didn't agree with its guess, the game got angry and started guessing animals instead of colours. Let's go there. And my dad was horrified. He was like, that's not what programming's for. But I think we can all agree, especially in 2025, that making weird and wonderful digital games most certainly is what programming is for. Thanks to the availability of accessible tool sets like Twine, and that people have always created their own games from whatever tools, technology, and inspiration are at hand. While undertaking my research, I particularly loved reading Anna Anthropy's instructional Twine guide for the first time, because she empowers creators implicitly, which is definitely what I want to achieve through my own teaching. Can you italicize words in your text-based game? Yes, you can. Can you make a game about sandwiches? Yes, of course you can. So at the Conservatorium, my tertiary music composition classes use a bespoke Twine audio template to present their original ideas for interactive music systems and games. And although the Mr. Ice Cream game was only Phil's first engagement with Twine, many students will then use Twine to create complex, detailed music games by the end of semester. This is a sample provided to my study of where a student learned to code extensively from scratch in order to realise their vision for a game. This is a very common thing for students to do. The research I conducted at Macquarie University in 2024 examined the intersections of Twine, activity-centred learning and music students. It was largely ethnographic and oriented towards me iterating on the design of my unit. I interviewed 6 students from my 2023 cohort to learn more about their experience of making games, focused around one key question: do you feel creating games made you a better composer of music? So responses to this question were mixed, which was pretty interesting, because the students who said no did actually identify clear ways that they did learn about musical structure, texture and melody by making games. So it also becomes a matter of perception, how learning is communicated between people, reflecting a recent shift towards a conservative framing of what education actually is. For example, students referred to practice and collaboration as separate from music learning, which I think are valid, perhaps essential ways to learn music. What may have genuinely undermined their music learning, however, is how much time students chose to spend making their games, because they were enjoying the novelty of storytelling and exploring game mechanics via Twine. These are some quotes from students. The first one said, everyone went hard on development and then did the music last minute right, which is probably not really my aim as a music teacher. With the second one, 4 or 5 times the amount of hours in Twine that I did in music. And then the last one, I'm just going to quickly make this really quick 4-bar loop. I am reluctant to discourage the time spent on actually learning how to use Twine and making games, however, because the diverse game output within the class motivates students to experiment. And it's via the process of experimentation that the best kind of music learning actually emerges. In this example, consider the student participant game in which the player chooses different items to give to Miriam, the performing monkey. That is the Twine audio template on the left. In the middle, that's the student's kind of build of the game. And then this is the game output here, obviously. And the player can choose like 6 different ways to interact with Miriam. If you give Miriam a synth, he will play along with the other 2 musicians, and a synth is added to the composition. This is obviously a diegetic implementation of a music layer, because the characters in the game can hear Miriam playing a synth. If you give him bananas, he will juggle, and the background music seamlessly becomes subdivided and circus-like, which is non-diegetic, like a soundtrack. This is the kind of clever, unique music learning about diegesis, for example, that happens when students are freely allowed to experiment with what game making can generate for them and their practice. So, my study addressed some of the areas for digital game-based learning that are currently underrepresented in research, especially for audio and browser implementation, and the teaching activity that supports game making, also raising more negative or actionable findings. The references are documented in the conference paper, and the findings are also detailed there to accompany this talk. As for me, I've learned a lot about how my teaching is received by students, and I've already made useful iterations to the design and the delivery of the Composing for Games unit. This was my first foray into research, so I wanted to make sure it was useful, and I've certainly used it as much as I can. I have great respect for all the researchers here and what you do. It's been a really great week. If you'd like to learn more about the weird, wonderful, and musical things programming can be for, I'd love to tell you more about my teaching.
Thank you so much, Meghann. Haven't we started strong? I did fail on the first hurdle of mispronouncing names. Second hurdle, I didn't tell you about the social media policy. Meghann's really happy with all pictures being shared on all platforms, as well as Nick, who's up next. So let me just introduce Nick again, but better. So this is Nikolas Matovinovic from Macquarie University. Sorry, from Monash University. Oh my God, I'm never going to get it right. Thank you so much.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Kaurna people, as well as those of the land on which I live and work, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Sovereignty was never ceded. All right. After 2 years of post-release content, Splatoon 3 ended its initial run of new content with the Grand Festival, a 72-hour event with in-game musical performances and a special music festival-themed hub world. So I'd just like to play you a bit of the trailer released before this event, just to give you a sense of what it's like. If this is loud, I'm sorry. And let's compare that now to a live event from 2016. Okay, so the question this paper seeks to answer is, what does any of this have to do with a multiplayer third-person shooter? In answering this question, I look at how Splatoon serves as a case study for thinking about questions of community and subjectivity in a post-human world. So, just a quick primer on the Splatoon series before we begin. Originally released for the Nintendo Wii U in 2015, the series sees you play as an anthropomorphic cephalopod called an Inkling, or an Octoling, if you're an octopus. Most gameplay modes involve painting the ground with your team's ink, which serves not only as a projectile, but also a movement aid, as players can transform into a more explicitly cephalopodic swim form to move through rather than on the world. This shift in understanding from the terrestrial world of planes and individuals to a more aquatic world of volumes and interconnection is what starts us on our journey into the world of the Tentacular. So, As we can see here, the gameplay properties seen on the last slide can also be seen in real-world cephalopods. Like that, the flamboyant cuttlefish up there, those aren't shadows, those are patterns it is actively sort of creating on its skin. But for our purposes today, let's focus on their decentralized nervous system. The cephalopod brain is a donut-shaped nerve cluster. It's a donut because their esophagus goes right through the middle of it, that handles visual processing and executive functions. But the majority of the central nervous system, that's the brain and spinal cord for us, is found scattered throughout the body, with major clusters or mini brains positioned in each limb. Melissa Bianchi makes the connection between this form of distributed agency and Splatoon's tentacular approach to gameplay that treats players like the mini-brains of the team rather than a series of discrete individuals. This is a tentacular assemblage rather than a rhizomatic one, a la Deleuze and Guattari, because this distributed network is still organized around the metaxis of emergent action and central executive function, the donut brain in cephalopods and the mission objective in Splatoon. Given that the center of this donut is a hole and that cephalopods have 3 hearts rather than 1, saying that anything is central to them is somewhat inaccurate. But this is in line with Felix Guattari's solo writing in The 3 Ecologies, where he argues for the preservation of subjectivity as a political project, just not one that focuses on the individual or individuality. Bianchi draws from a robust line of writing on tentacularity in screen media, in particular Donna Haraway's articulation of the term in Staying with the Trouble, making kin in the Thulu scene, and her emphasis on sympoiesis, that is, making with non-human critters when we create things like art. Staying with the phenomenologists, Willem Flusser's attribution of a squid-like quality to 21st century is expanded upon not only by Bianchi, but also by William Brown and David H. Fleming in Squid Cinema from Hell, through the networked operations of the internet to the image processing and display capabilities of cephalopod skin. Tentacularity isn't just restricted to screen media, as seen in Kai-Sing Tan's work on tentacular pedagogy, which uses the example of the cephalopod to imagine neurodiverse traits outside the language of disorders. And more writing on inclusivity and tentacularity is found in a paper published in Games and Culture last year. But all of these discourses are commonly categorized as post-humanist, the postmodern turn at the intersection of humanism and scientific destabilizations of the concept of the human. But the ease by which post-humanism and new materialism can synergize with climate doomerism and Silicon Valley ideology leaves me feeling skeptical about the assumed virtue of abandoning humanism altogether. What then is post-humanism? Splatoon offers an exemplary path forward here through the way it handles anthropomorphism. If you look closely at inklings or octolings, you can see that they have beaks instead of teeth and their hair is made of tentacles. But besides this, there aren't any substantial differences to other stylized animated humanoids. Instead, it is their swim form that looks and acts like a cephalopod. But in normal gameplay, the two forms are alternated between each other so frequently that it hardly warrants mention. Just as there is a hole in the center of the cephalopod brain or between their 3 hearts, so too is there a gap at the center of the subjective experience of playing as an inkling that isn't resolved through synthesis or dominance, but rather the fluctuation itself. What we're talking about here is an in-betweenness or metaxi. Timotheus Vermeulen and Robin van den Akker's 2010 essay Notes on Metamodernism outlines a heuristic for discussing the growing discourse that seeks to look for whatever is post the postmodern sensibility in late capitalist culture. Metamodernism's emphasis on metaxi and a neo-romantic nostalgic earnestness makes it a useful framework to try and answer the question on posthumanism I posed earlier. For the purposes of our case study here, metamodernism's cultural dimension helps us discuss the metactic properties we found in the physicality of inkling bodies and transpose them onto the figures of these pop idols themselves that play such a big role in the paratexts and narratives of the game series. Unlike the Vocaloid Hatsune Miku, who is a computer program that synthesizes her voice from scratch, or virtual bands like Gorillaz, where the virtual characters act as skins for the work of other artists, Splatoon's idols fit somewhere in between, as we can see in this. I'll play you a bit of this recording session from Splatoon 3. The lyrics are meant to be nonsense, by the way. All right, you get the point. You get the point. Rina Ito and Alice Peralta have musical careers of their own, separate to their personas of Pearl and Marina, featured there. But they're not completely separate either. Ito and Peralta's collaborations in Splatoon and non-Splatoon related settings, like their collaboration tracks they've released themselves, or live streams of them playing the game, lend a metactic quality to these virtual idols' personas. The nature of who is actually performing when off the hook are on a real stage is a similar proposition to the question of inkling morphology we discussed earlier. The flexible boundaries between stars and their personas is a well-established part of academic writing on celebrities, but the presentation of this theme in Splatoon emphasizes the dichotomy between the virtual and the actual, as well as an ecological tentacularity that transforms the figure of the celebrity idol into a familiar site of translation for these more abstracted concepts. Oh, wait a second, that's not meant to be. No. There we go, that's better. That's more like, yeah. Sorry, I don't know how that happened. This isn't a translation where the denizen of one world metaphorically enters another, but rather a fantastic translation, as described by Bliss Kwa Lim, where the heterogeneity of multiple temporalities is intensified rather than erased by the translation. The non-human world is represented in screen media through modes such as, climate modeling or nature documentaries or, fables. And in its own way, Splatoon translates a tentacular ecological experience through its own metamodern sensibility. I'm not proposing that this emergent ecological social order is a conscious construction on the part of, famously jolly company Nintendo or fans, but rather a sympoietic property of the game's twin interests in the tentacular and in creating the community environment necessary for consistent online play. Splatoon is, after all, the first Nintendo franchise to be built around online play primarily. The question of whether you can understand what it's like to be a squid is, unanswerable, But the experience of being split between a virtual and actual body is one that we live in daily, and which gets us thinking about the split minds of these creatures through the language of our own digital ecosystems. Now, if you would permit me a little poetic indulgence, I'd like to wrap up by shifting my focus from the real and virtual rooms I've been discussing thus far to this room specifically. We are not the only creatures that have been compelled to migrate to coastal South Australia. Off the coast of Whyalla in the Spencer Gulf, every year sees the world's largest cuttlefish, the Australian giant cuttlefish is the name, meet in the world's largest congregation of cuttlefish in order to mate. Could I have given this paper anywhere but here? And having this thought at the front of my mind, how did that affect the way this talk came to be? Focusing on the specificity of nature here means taking seriously the materiality and physicality of where we are when we talk about ecology and ecosystems in media. I wouldn't perhaps be thinking tentacularly if I gave things a neat answer that wrapped up all the loose ends. So I'm just going to finish things here, and thank you.
Thank you so much. You would have noticed my deliberate mistake of associating Nick with Monash. No, I meant Uni of Melbourne. Of course I did. I'm going to stop being so rubbish. I do apologize. But next up, and thank you so much for that, we have Louis Fourie from RMIT University here to talk about their work. Thank you. Good day, ravers. My talk today, Cursebending. Let's get into it. So the project, it's a work in progress as part of my Masters of Games, Interactive Media, Animation at RMIT University. I've been developing a game called Dance Dance Deception, which is a goofy dance simulator featuring a rave demon and cursed ravers. So the main mechanic of the game, or one of the main mechanics, is that, okay, so you're a team of ravers on the way to Rumble at the Rave, sort of a reality TV dance competition. sort of the main mechanic is that you compose these dancers. You're like a choreographer who are preparing these dancers, and your team learns. Yeah, so you're preparing these moves, choreographing moves to prepare to show at the competition. And then the team learns these moves, but with a little bit of cookedness. I don't know if you notice anything weird going on there. So there's a curse that is affecting the dancers and spreading amongst the team. So another mechanic in the game is that you are trying to manage all these misbehaving elements and fix the curses that's spreading amongst the dancers, so that you can do good and have, you know, a good performance for the competition. The curse of the rave demon. And through little mini games, you're sort of debugging the characters and trying to get back to normal, or maybe not. And if you kind of let things get out of hand, you know, some crazy results. And I'd like you to think with me about this idea of a choreographer as an analogy for any creator or developer. Choreography as in we're making a sort of digital dance, whatever we're creating. And so some of the background inspiration for me are works that really celebrate sort of odd, wrong, ugly design elements, foregrounds these kind of digital artifacts, intentionally sort of synthetic behavior. And so yeah, here's some examples. Octodad, maybe a good mention there in terms of just games for its awkward sort of control mechanics, and has kind of been related to ideas about queer identity in our world. The key words that frame this practice is procedurality, play, queer gaming, and jank, that I'll kind of flesh out a little bit. Procedurality specifically is this idea of meaning being conveyed through processes that can be manipulated. A lot of focus is on rules. Important idea here is the simulation gap. Hello? Oh, yeah, thanks. The simulation gap that Bagost talked about, which is the gap between that rule-based representation and the player's subjectivity. It's also been talked about as radical potential in terms of how messing with these rules and things can almost help us reshape social norms. And something that I've become more interested in is embodiment and the idea of a cybernetic circuit. So that feedback loop through player and technology, and how disrupting that and those messy interactions can activate a kind of embodiment, because usually the cybernetic circuit is meant to maybe be more invisible and intuitive, and making us aware of that has potential, I think, as well. So in my game, there's this overarching goal that we have to perform well at the competition. We have to get rid of all these weird behaviors. And these ruptures then, like, at least this is my secret aim, that becomes sort of opportunities for play. So then we get, yeah, so just throwing some books in your face. So then play is really important. That's key. The player makes meaning. They bring their own personal and creative self to the game. And players can appropriate a game for their own purposes that can be contrary to the procedurally embedded designs. And then at the same time, I'm not just talking about play as like the game is this final product that players play with, but also thinking about the development process as a playful process. I am the first player of my game. I'm not just working towards an outcome. And so that idea of the design process being a collaborative engagement with digital tools, an openness to accept digital things for what they are and how they behave, and responding to that. So it's a process of discovery rather than just this intention. And so that, at least for me, and maybe a lot of designers and developers can relate to that it's hard to sort of sometimes suspend that intentionality when these weird things come up. More books for your eyeballs. So queer gaming, this sort of relatively young field, it sort of overlaps with play theory, and that was sort of where my question was, is how can queer theory and play theory and the overlaps between them be used to engage with procedurality. And so, yeah, that overlap is about appropriating and manipulating systems, rules, and procedures to creatively imagine new possibilities. Chang talks about that in terms of non-competitive play, embracing goofiness, inefficiency, exploring different values and rules, and the radical potential of failure. And then how that's primed for radical play practices to disrupt, subvert, the rules and mechanics of games, and also just sort of conventions of how we play. And janky, messy, and unexpected behavior can lead to new forms of play. So, and you know, how that can lead to more diverse expressions, embodied experiences, and other possible meanings for players to make. Yeah, some more of that. So, cursebending. What is cursebending? It's like a strange kind of power. Or does it just look weird? Is it something you want to get over? So all these cursed and broken, janky, glitched things, these unexpected behaviors, what I find interesting is that it exposes those, what people usually want to polish away, those invisible computer processes, and that actually presents opportunities to play. And I think, like, whenever I play a game, I immediately try and find everything that I'm not supposed to do and fool around, find out what happens if. So whenever I'm talking about play, I want you to remember that it's not just about the final game that you play, but also, for me, it's important that this was in the creative process, at least as my practice-based research. And so that presents an opportunity to bend the processes where I, curse bending. So what I had to do, and what I mentioned before, is that intentionality versus discovery. I had to really find ways to stop myself and pay attention rather than just this instinct of like, oh crap, here's something weird and I'd better fix it, and like, because I've got to make it work. And so I started engaging in this process of documentation. It seems quite obvious, but like, as like weird stuff come up and like, what the hell's happening here? I sort of pause, I record it, like I treat it like a little animal in my free range farm, instead of just trying to put it in a cage so that it can achieve its function to lay me an egg or whatever, like give it a bit of space. So I give it some names, like no bones left behind. Yeah, whatever's going on there. Because of course you spend time with it to fix it, but it's not just about fixing it at once. Some things are just kind of, and then some things are kind of more interesting. So like there was a lot of this. So yeah, this kind of stuff might be familiar to anyone who works with stuff like rigging and animation. So I'd like to just show you some things, because I really enjoy these moments where it's like, oh, it's not behaving the way it's meant to, but it's showing us something about digital processes and what they do. Like when two updates are like fighting for the same moment in time, it's like quantum confusion, and then it's a bit like reverse engineering it back into the game, and you get all these kind of cool and weird results, or at least I think so. I'm like, Right. Yeah, so this is maybe just a small way, like just maybe one entry point into engaging with digital things. So yeah, so my reflections on making the game and playing the game, it's for me the same thing. Playing is making is playing. And I'm hoping this idea of choreography alongside Cursebending as a process might be inspiring for other designers. The Rave Demon is more fun. Try and suspend those preconceived ideas and open up to the process of discovery. It's fine for those processes to expose itself in the game. I think I'd like to think players like to play with that, so that messy, irreverent process, goofy, janky, weird things. There can be things to play with. For myself, I'd really like to explore more of the above. I know I've only sort of scratched at it in these small ways. There's such a huge pipeline of entry points to push more of that. And I'm really a lot more interested now in that idea of the cybernetic circuit embodiment through Jank. Something I'm constantly grappling with is like, how is this queer? Is this queer? Is this radical? Like, because I think, you can make a weird game, and some other smart people have discussed that the limitations of that. For example, how, dude bros can play this and the same kind of bumbling, stupid way, but it can sort of reinforce toxic heteronormative behaviors. So yeah, that's a thing I'm gonna continue grappling with, like how can we make this like undeniably queer, and it's the question for me. So yeah, and I really think for myself, like I appreciate like queer readings and queer ways of playing, but for myself, like I'd really like and appreciate the opportunity to use practice-based design to unpack some of these ideas that maybe feel a bit more speculative or propositional in like the literature that I've encountered. And yeah, so hopefully I'm hoping to contribute to the field in that way. Yeah, thank you. So embrace the Rave Demon. Thank you so much, Louis. Round of applause for all three presenters. They were all fantastic, unlike the chair. So we have got a generous 15 minutes for questioning. If the three presenters would like to come back to the stage, we'll take questions from the room. And Phil is online, just to remind you. We can ask questions to Phil, the creator of the first game.
Thanks to all the speakers. It was all very good. I like all the tentacles, so congratulations. Yeah, my name's Kate, and I just had a quick question for Lou. I was wondering if you had, I really enjoyed your exploration through practice. I think that's really cool, and something that I don't do. So I'm like, this is amazing. I love it. Did you have any ideas about, where you were going next with this sort of jank and embodiment and all of that kind of stuff? Did you have future thoughts that you haven't really kind of got to explore yet? And you can say no, and we can move on.
No, yeah, no. It's like a question for me at the moment, because I'm at the point of my master's where we're going to be disseminating. So a lot of that is about, and I have shown it at Free Play Angles and our Magi Expo, and each of those sort of, because there's it's rare and precious to have players playing with it, because that's such an important thing for me, and to observe that. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot, can this be in different forms? Can I maybe just focus on maybe making a flash mob kind of dance thing that works in a different way? And of course, I've only used sort of a controller as input and interaction, and so there's also questions for me about like, could alternative controllers be an option? Could different ways of interacting with it present opportunities to explore that? I don't know if I'm answering. Yeah. I'm keen to just try out different spaces and environments. Yeah. Yeah, because the context is going to really change every time how players make meaning. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Question at the back. Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks. So it's been Nicole from QT. Just a question for Nick. So yeah, I was like a Splatoon mega fan. I probably still am in spirit. I had to let it go. I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit more about the tentacular dimensions of the multiplayer aspects of Splatoon, because you talked about the squid transition stuff and the everything happening around the game. But then you made a brief comment that I thought was really interesting about cephalopods having multiple brains. And then that, I think you made a comparison to the squad-based nature of Splatoon. And Splatoon has always struck me as quite conventionally squad-based shooter. And I'm just kind of interested to hear more, I guess.
Yeah, so first of all, everything I can say to answer that question is answered better in Melissa Bianchi's article in Ecozone, which is cited in the abstract. But to summarize her arguments there, is that it ties into her article is on Splatoon 1 and Octodad, and how both of them, especially the multiplayer version of Octodad, force the player to engage more as an assemblage than a coordinated team. And a big part of that for Splatoon is, she makes some points about the Wii U gamepad, which we can kind of maybe dismiss for later versions, but a big point of that is the lack of voice chat and the rapid nature of the games, which the article, my article that I name dropped there, takes that forward and says that this lack of voice chat doesn't just help with creating this almost sort of unconscious connection to other players. You can't speak to them. You can't centrally coordinate. You have to kind of just go on vibes, which is similar to how the cephalopod nervous system operates in the way that we can, compare non-human to human things. There's always, a little bit of gap there. And I think that also lends part of the game, part of its like inclusivity to people who traditionally feel marginalized from space. Like the lack of voice chat is really important, but that's inseparable from the tentacular nature of that, in that the lack of voice chat kind of meshes with the decentralized thought patterns of it. So further than that, I think Bianchi's article is a great source for more granular information on that topic.
I also have a question for Nick, also about tentacles. So obviously you've made this really compelling connection between Splatoon and Tentacular, and obviously the big fact of that that may have started that is that Splatoon is full of squids, etc., cephalopods, whatever. I guess what I'm interested in is how you perceive this kind of concept of the tentacular in games. Is it a formal quality that can be abstracted away from things that have images of cephalopods in it? Like, can we describe for example, if there was a squad-based military shooter set in, the wherever, a Vietnam War shooter that had no voice chat in it, is that tentacular, or is it something specific about the aesthetics of the squid, etc., that creates this vibe? I guess what I'm just kind of interested is this connection between form and mechanics, and then aesthetics and kind of themes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is addressed in again, I'm going to assign more homework as part of my answer. In Brown and Fleming's Squid Cinema from Hell, the full title, which is Kinotuthis Infernalis: The Rise of Cthulhu Media. It was too long to include, but they talk about how the Tentacular is not universally good, and this is really apparent in Flusser's Vampiroteuthis Infernalis, where he really frames the coming Tentacular 21st century as one that's going to be quite nasty. And this kind of fits into like if you look at historical depictions of cephalopods, they're evil. Like think of like propaganda posters of a big octopus on a map, and villains have an octopus in a tank. But now they're cute and fluffy. But that evil quality, evil quality is still there. And so, number one, I think if we're taking Flusser and Brown and Fleming's approach to the Tentacular, then yeah, we could say that is Tentacular in the same way that, like, the CIA is kind of Tentacular. Tentacular isn't necessarily good. And that's, I guess, why I kind of stressed Haraway's idea of sympoiesis and really focused on, like, the particulars of these creatures and the particulars of, like, where we are and how we are. Us and our sort of values and the things we actually want to see in the world are enmeshed ecologically in things. And so I guess to answer that question, yes, and that's maybe why focusing on as many elements as you can, which is, again, sort of like an ecological way of thinking. And Brown and Fleming open their book with a discussion on the word perhaps, why they keep on saying perhaps, 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 because they don't want a neat definition of things, in the same way that we're talking about a very different mode of existence on this planet when we talk about these creatures. And so we can't really know exactly what's going on. And keeping that at the forefront is, I think, is important when we have these discussions.
Thank you.
Online, so I might take that first and then we'll move on. Question for Meghann. Students starting from nothing and learning the core basics of interactive composition is fantastic, but do you think the technical limitations of Twine might limit some of the compositional design decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the big findings of my research was that Twine doesn't work well with audio. I already knew that, but what I found was specifically why, and actually sort of dug more into the teaching strategies that I can use to mitigate that as a problem. So because Twine is such an accessible engine, it allows students to learn really fast how to create a game, but the audio implementation is rarely perfect, like it's rarely seamless. Sometimes those variations of music, like in the ice cream game, you may have noticed that the music was shifting, but we could still tap the pulse in time. Sometimes, browsers don't play music in time, and being able to kind of mitigate all those issues as I was teaching was certainly a big finding of the study. The question is, do you then switch to a more difficult engine like Unity? It would be a massive task to get a composition class to learn Unity in 12 weeks. So definitely one of the findings of my research involved balancing priorities and being able to identify what my teaching priorities are and balance them. Was that a suitable answer?
Marianne Butt, University of Melbourne. I was going to ask Nick why phenomenology, but we can chat later. I love phenomenology. It's just a joke. But I thought I'd go wild card and ask a question for all three panelists so that I can get 3 stars at once. I was just thinking about Donna Haraway's situated knowledges, and I was wondering if maybe to invite all 3 of you to talk about the influences of time and space within, I guess, what you were speaking about for each.
I have the microphone, so I believe I'm going first. I don't really understand the academic implication of that. However, when it comes to time, music is obviously a temporal medium, which usually flows from left to right. And so as a game composer and game composition teacher, being able to demonstrate to people that that's not the case in games and that time has to flow according to how the player is interacting with the game is an absolutely fundamental concern that underpins all of game music composition, I think. And it's quite amazing that students can actually do this in the first 2 or 3 weeks of class, like Phil did with the ice cream game. So they can actually experience this change. I mean, Powell played it in a couple of minutes. You could play that in 10 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever. So I do think about time a lot in my teaching.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with that part of Haraway's. Like, can I just pass it to you first? And
I mean, I might forgive me if this answer sort of walks around the question, I guess. But in terms of, I don't know, at least in terms of temporality, a huge influence on my work has been Bliss Qualem, who writes on fantasy and screen media, like in a way that's derived from like Bergson and Deleuze. But she writes in an explicitly like East Asian, like post-colonial cinema context, and so that's kind of like, I'm coming at this from screen studies, which I guess why I'm focusing on all these like paratexts, like music videos and such around the game. But I guess in terms of like situated knowledge and such, I mean, I'm writing about things that I am not not entirely plugged into. Like, I don't actually play that much Splatoon. Like, I'm an A player maximum, A minus. That's it. That's as far as I go. That's enough. I don't need to develop calluses on my thumbs. But also when I'm writing about stuff like the stuff about Kaising Tan and like neurodivergence in tentacular pedagogy, like. I can't speak for all neurodivergent people, and nor should I. And when I write stuff saying like, oh, women and queer people find Splatoon, inclusive, it's like, well, I've spoken to some people who say that, but I don't know. And so I think part of the cultivation of this ecological approach and really leaning into just my own strange obsessions as a way of like still contributing to this discourse in a way that I think is productive, but doesn't crowd out those voices that I can't feel that I can speak for, I think is my way of like, I don't know, engaging with this in a way that's like productive and healthy and nice. I hope that, gets somewhere around that.
Yeah, can I ask you about that after? Yeah, because I can't say I've specifically thought about time and space. So I'll just waffle and yeah, I'd rather not.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Angus. I'm just a person. My question, my question was for Meghann. It's quite similar to the online question, but I thought of it before that. But I'm curious about your relationship with the tools and like how much of your findings were independent to that, and if you're curious about exploring that more, and also like does time warrant that, like where you'd like to go.
Yeah, cool. That's an awesome question. And I tried to make some recommendations for other teachers who are teaching game making to learn something else artistic. And one of the recommendations I made was careful choice of tool set in terms of accessibility, like how much time it would take to learn and all of that. I would say that from a musical perspective, a lot of my findings weren't even so much about Twine. They were how people used the Twine build to compose music. So for example, that Monkey Miriam game, the composer in that case found that they were creating compositions with too much textural content, and therefore it was difficult to strip out the content as they went to make meaningful change in the musical variations, if that makes sense. So I suppose a lot of my findings weren't necessarily only tied to the tool set of Twine or other things that we use in class. They were mostly about the actual musical compositions themselves and how students found musical solutions to the strictures of the tech that we use. Hopefully that answers most of it.
Thank you, Duncan. Was it? That's okay. So we have got time for one more question if there's any questions in the room. Maybe there's a question coming through here. Let me check. We have got a question from a collective here for Meghann again. Twine and interactive fiction doesn't usually involve analog inputs, i.e. each choice is discrete rather than continuous, like movement, play a mouse, etc. Are you interested in exploring non-interactive fiction, interactive media, and interactive music?
Yes. With my class, we start off using Twine because it's accessible and it teaches them how to make reactivity and the fact that time doesn't always flow forwards, different structures and so on. But then we move into industry middleware programs within about the first 6 weeks. So we also use Wise and Fmod. And I also have a Unity template, which for some students will then use as well. So I suppose Twine is really just a launching place for students to create a game that is actually finished, because it's much more difficult for a student to share their Fmod project with other people as a demonstration because it's not a completed game, whereas many students will stay with Twine because they enjoy the complete experience of being able to make a finished interactive fiction game. But when it comes to using Wise and Fmod and so on, students really enjoy also the same kinds of experimentation with parameters and distance and all of the higher level functions that you get with those middleware engines. So they do, and again, they are solving problems musically. So they will solve whatever challenges they come up against with the musical structure, they will solve it with composition kind of solutions, adding more layers, changing the structure of the melody and so on. So it's cool to see how they start with Twine, but then can branch out to bigger, more complicated things.
Thank you all, and please, again, let's celebrate our 3 panelists, Meghann, Lou, and Nick, for their fantastic talks. Thank you so much. We are going to take just 5 minutes to swap over, and then we'll continue to part 2. So just a moment to stand up, walk around, stretch your legs, and come back. Thank you.